In today's video, I'll be running through how I've recently refurbished these 60-plus-year-old cast iron gutters, and I'll also be explaining to you a few of the tricks I've learnt in the last 3 years that I've been doing this. Now, we moved into this cottage back in 2010, and these gutters have long been on my list of things that needed sorting out. Looking at the old gutters, you'd be forgiven for thinking they're long past the point of refurbishing, and it would have been better to rip them out and replace them, as in fact quite a lot of you pointed out when these gutters have occasionally featured in my videos. But if you look at the gutters I repainted in October 2018 and how good they still look today 3 years later, you'll start to see why it was worth all that hard work. So let's have a quick look at today's toolkit because it's surprisingly simple. We've got the Hamilton Prestige Heavy Duty Scraper, the Hilker Wire Wheel Brush, along with a grinder, Neutrarust 661 Rust Converter, Bonda Rust Primer, Johnston Storm Shield Exterior Gloss, Bostik Bituminous Paint, a knackered old chisel, multi-solve spray from CT1, or you could use Zinsser degreaser and cleaner, or even just sugar soap solution, this Hargreaves Foundry cast iron gutter jointing kit, Timba Glaze hybrid polymer glazing sealant, which is basically a putty replacement, and Metoset, which I have to say is not essential for this job. So one of the questions you're going to face is whether you should remove those gutters and downpipes to strip them off and repaint. Well, for me at least, with the downpipes cemented into the ground and attached to the wall the traditional way with nails belted into wooden plugs, more on that in a bit, it just wasn't practical to remove them. So I tend to leave the downpipes in place. But I do remove the gutters themselves and the downpipe offsets which connect those gutters to the downpipes, as it's much easier to strip down the gutters and repair the joints with the gutters removed. And also the rise and fall brackets for the gutters cannot really be stripped and painted with the gutters in situ. It was in removing the gutters and offsets that one section of downpipe literally fell away from the wall. The nails attaching it to the wall had rusted, and probably the wooden plugs belted into the wall back in the day had also disintegrated. So this section of downpipe came down as well. All very convenient, but don't forget, if it rains whilst you're refurbishing this stuff, it will leave the house exposed to water getting in through the walls. So it's wise to work in small sections. When it rained for me, fortunately, the water dripped harmlessly into the soak wire I installed when we moved into the house. So, on to removing the old paint. I was intending to strip all the paint off the gutters and then prime them with a brilliant Bonda Rust Primer that I discovered 3 years ago. A resin-based zinc anti-rust coating which, when combined with this Johnston Storm Shield flexible gloss, has produced a finish which 3 years later is still looking fantastic with no signs of the rust reappearing. The gutters were coated in a badly peeling top coat and a thick bitumen sublayer, which I realised is mainly responsible for the cast iron gutters having survived so well all this time. There's no easy way to strip it off. I've experimented over the years with heat guns and this Stanley scraper, but I've found the simplest approach is to use a combination of this Hamilton Prestige Heavy Duty Scraper tool and an old chisel for the more tricky to reach areas. Brilliant though this scraper tool is, it had a pretty major design flaw, at least the one I had did when I bought it. On one hand you've got these super durable tungsten carbide reversible blades, similar to what you'd find on an electric planer. But you see this plate here, I had to modify this because the plate that shipped with the tool was so thin that this metal piece kept bending and the blade kept falling out. So I ended up having to make a new plate improvised for an old roller blind bracket in a heavier grade of steel. And I've now got a very capable tool, and these blades really do go on forever. But there are other scraper tools around. Paul, professional painter on my Discord chat forum, has recommended this, and there's a little bit more about him later on in the video. Now, some of you might be wondering why I was stripping back those gutters to the bare metal. The answer is it's very difficult not to once you start scraping away the paint with a tool like this. And if you don't remove all of the paint, you're left with a slightly contoured surface, with the base layer of bitumen, in my case, partly worn away in places. So with the help of this brilliant Hilker wire brush on my grinder, it was very easy to strip down the gutters and downpipes to leave a near pristine finish. I have in the past experimented with drill mounted wire brushes, but they're not nearly as effective at removing paint like this. Although they certainly had their uses on this project for difficult to reach areas like this, so I do recommend you buying a set like this one. I'll post a link in the description below the video. However, if you've watched last week's video, you'll realise this presented me with a problem, because having reduced the gutters and downpipes back to the bare metal, it started oxidising or rusting almost immediately, because unfortunately the rain came down before I had a chance to get any primer on. So if you find yourself in this situation, or perhaps more likely you've still got some rusted sections on your gutters or downpipes, I can massively recommend Neutrarust 661 rust converter to neutralise the corrosion and leave you with a hard black, non-tacky hydrophobic film, which is a perfect neutral primer base coat for you then to paint over. For more information on Neutrarust and how it works, check out last week's video, a link to which is coming up on screen now. But whether you're using Neutrarust or going straight to a primer like Bonda Rust Primer, you need to degrease the surface first. On the gutters 3 years ago I used this Zinza degreaser and cleaner, or you could just use some sugar soap solution or everyday detergent, and the paint manufacturers tend to do their own degreasers too. But with these products you then need to fully rinse off the surface before priming, so I decided this time to experiment with the brilliant multi-solve spray from CT1, which you may have seen me use on my silicone videos. Because it evaporates leaving no residue, you don't need to rinse down the surface after application. So the Neutrarust gives you a fully primed surface that can be immediately followed up with a top coat. And in fact, this is exactly what they do on oil rigs where the conditions mean that time is really against them and they don't have an opportunity to get on that secondary primer coat. But for belt and braces in my case, and out of habit, as this is what I did 3 years ago, after applying the Neutrarust, I then treated the iron with Bonda Rust Primer. People say this is basically red oxide, but I don't think that's right, because I think it has a much higher zinc content. It's a great way to stop rust coming back, and I absolutely swear by this stuff. Although I accept I have gone a bit off-piste using Bonda with this flexible gloss, so you might prefer to use the primer recommended by the manufacturer of your top coat. So on to dismantling the gutters. Let's quickly discuss what to do with the gutter sections. I was lucky here because I was able to remove the entire run, being short, in just one piece, and it could easily be lifted off given it's just resting on those rise and fall brackets. However, this much longer section will need dismantling bit by bit before each section is lifted down. But given that this short section came off in one piece, it was so tempting to leave all of the bits attached, complete with half-round running outlets and external stop ends. But I'm glad I didn't. For one, a lot of the joints are leaking and drip when it rains. But also, in dismantling them, it revealed just how much moisture was building up beneath the joints, where the bitumen or gutter seal, whatever they'd used over the years, was failing. So I resolved to unbolt the sections or grind them away where I couldn't unscrew them and put them back together with this gutter jointing kit I bought a few years ago, which I'll come on to in a minute. With all the sections taken apart, they were also much easier to strip down, clean and treat with the Neutrarust and Bonda Rust Primer. I then painted 2 coats of the Johnston Storm Shield oil-based flexible gloss on the gutters, downpipes, offset downpipes, running outlets and stop ends, and the rise and fall brackets. There are obviously a huge array of paints you can choose from. I buy this stuff from my local Johnston's Decorator Centre because I think their paint is pretty good quality, but there are other options, obviously Dulux Weather or Metal Shield, and another tip from Paul the Decorator on our Discord group, Tickerilla Mironol. He asked me to point out to you that it's a Thixotropic paint, so it's a lot less likely to drip from a brush and doesn't run or sag as much. Paul's worked on some pretty cool projects over the years, including spraying with specialist equipment, so I'll post a link to his Instagram page in the description below this video. With 2 top coats applied, I then painted the inside of the gutters with my Bostik Bituminous paint, which I've previously used for a number of jobs, including the underground section of the decking posts and decking subframe. And with the painting complete, I could finally reassemble the gutters, half-round running outlets and those stop ends, using the rubber gaskets and bolts from the gutter jointing kit. I really like these gaskets as an alternative to using silicone or glazing putty, gutter sealant, or whatever it is people tend to use to join together the gutter sections. And whilst this jointing kit should not be used to support any unsupported lengths of guttering, it does nevertheless create an incredibly strong watertight seal between each section, leaving the simple job of dabbing some bitumen on the exposed bolts. Now I thought long and hard about the best way to reattach that downpipe to the wall. It had been originally fixed in place with 2 nails hammered into wooden plugs, buried in the wall. And the gutter had been spaced away from the wall with cut sections of lead pipework. Quite a clever idea, I thought. One option I had was to belt some new hardwood plugs in place of the old ones into the wall and screw the downpipes into those plugs. This seemed like the most secure way of fixing what is quite a heavy bit of metal. But I decided at the last minute to actually drill out the holes, insert Fisher 10 by 160mm frame fixings and pipe around them with the Metoset epoxy resin I had left over from the recent crack filling job, a link to which is coming up on screen now. Basically using that Metoset like a chemical anchor, which with its sandy consistency and ability to overpaint is absolutely perfect for this job, and which I also used to re-anchor these rise and fall brackets that had become loose. I set the frame fixings at a raised angle as I knew that the downpipe was really lower on the wall than was ideal for the offset downpipe. More on this in a minute. Now these frame fixings come with a Torx head, which I think is a fantastic new development, as I don't know about you, but I've always found that even PZ3 screw bits just seem too small for the very large heads you get on a lot of frame fixings. With the end result, it's quite easy to burr them out as you're trying to screw them into the wall. With the Torx heads, I was able to drive these home effortlessly with no fear of the screw head being compromised. With the excellent Ryobi RDD 18X drill driver that I'm sort of trying out at the moment from Ryobi's new high performance range. By the way, I have not been paid anything to mention this tool. Very impressed with this bit of kit, and I might do a review on this at some point. And I was so pleased with how rock solid that downpipe now felt. That is not going anywhere. And so we're on to sealing the various sections together. So when these gutters and downpipes were all attached over 60 years ago, where the offsets, downpipes and gutter outlets met, the gaps were filled with what I can only imagine was glazing putty. And if I'm honest, some of the gutters that I repainted 3 years ago are still unfinished, as you can see here, with gaps left where I'd removed that glazing putty and hadn't got around to filling it with anything else. But I decided that I needed to do this job properly, and this was partially motivated by a bit of a problem I had. The builders who constructed the downpipes and gutters back in the 1970s didn't really set them up perfectly. And what I mean by that is that the offset downpipe, if just left to naturally sit in the downpipe below, leaves a good few inches gap between the offset and the gutter outlet that it's trying to join. And in case you're wondering, this isn't because I re-screwed that downpipe too low on the wall. I put it into exactly the same screw holes and actually raised it up a bit by angling those lead pipe sections when I chemically fixed them into position. So I had to raise it up or suspend it somehow. And for this I had two options. This Timba Glaze hybrid polymer glazing sealant from Timba Build, which I'll come on to in a minute, or that Metoset again. I decided that the Metoset, when set hard, would provide a much stronger bond. And so I tied the downpipe offset into position and piped Metoset around the downpipe opening and left it to set. And when fully set an hour or so later, I took off the string and the offset section was absolutely rock solid. For the rest of the joints, I did use this Timba Glaze. I spent a long time pondering what to use for this, but this came well recommended to me by Andy at Chemfix, who I've known for a number of years, as an all-weather superior replacement to window putty. Chemfix had supplied me with that Metoset for the crack filling video and also with a tube of this, but I should point out they haven't paid me anything to mention them in today's video, but they did provide this product free of charge. So it was out with a Kramer tool and time to tool the glazing sealant around all those gaps, and I've got to say I was really pleased with the results. 24 hours or so later, I was able to overpaint that sealant with the flexible gloss paint. So that's it, another section of gutters and downpipes refurbished. Now I've got to this project a bit late in the year and I'm sort of running out of weather now to complete all the sections that I haven't painted yet. So I'll leave the remaining sections until next year, confident that that bitumen sublayer will hopefully protect them for just one more winter. Now, links to everything I've used today will as usual be in the description below this video, which don't forget you can access on your smartphone by clicking on that little arrow and on your PC by clicking on the show more button. A couple other things to mention. Oh, the first one is I've now launched my new merch store. I got a friend who's a very talented graphic designer to come up with some pretty cool, I think, designs. Let me know what you think. I'll put a link to that in the description below the video as well. And finally, just a quick reminder about my Discord chat forum. For £5 a month, you can tap into our incredibly friendly forum that features a number of passionate DIYers as well as professional electricians, Wi-Fi, home automation experts, painters, carpenters, engineers, and of course me. Whatever our areas of expertise in the day job, we all share a passion for DIY and a love of helping each other out with our projects. I'll post a link in the description to where you can sign up, or if you prefer you can simply buy me a coffee, and with that membership you'll also be automatically entered into our monthly free giveaway. It's more of a financial struggle than you would think running a full-time DIY channel, and so this is just one wonderful way that you can help me to keep making this content, whilst maybe solving a few DIY problems at the same time. Last but not least, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon.